strength like no other reaches to me.
Well, good morning and welcome to the CCG Hour for this morning. And of course, you can say it with me by now. For those of you who know me very well and have been listening to the program, it is a great day to be alive. The fact that you are listening to me, that's a great thing. And don't say to me, Wendy, the amount of pain I'm in. Yes, I could understand that there may be some things not going too well or not as you might, want them to. But it is still a great day to be alive, right? It is good to rejoice in the day that the Lord has made. This morning, those of you who caught the program last week would have heard me say that we are doing just a slight tweaking to the way we do the program, which is that we are going to open the program with prayer. Not a long prayer. I'm not going and have a crusade, but I do want to just offer a word of prayer before we start the program. Today, though, I am chatting with somebody that is no stranger to you and certainly no stranger to the program, whom I will introduce you to when we finish the quick prayer. And then so let's do just that. Father, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for the gift of life. Father, we thank you for every listener and every viewer today. And even as we go into this discussion, we pray your mighty hand will continue to be upon us. We offer this program into your hands in Jesus' name. Amen. Just that. Wasn't long at all. So today, and of course, because he has a lot to say, he says it in such a quiet and I have learned a lot from him, trust me. But today, because he would have a lot to say about what I don't know much about, I know only to eat it because I like it a lot, is Reverend James. He's going to talk to us about, we're going to be talking corn today. Reverend James, good morning.
Good morning.
You laugh when I say we're talking corn today.
Talking corn, yes.
Yes, we are talking corn today. But before we go into just talking corn, I do want to just say to those of you who may have just caught the program, maybe it's the first time you're looking at the CCG Hour, Reverend James is the moderator. That's what we call it for the Presbyterian Church, right? Yeah, moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Grenada, and is also a member of the CCG. And it is really, I'm always excited whenever I have someone from the CCG Hour here. Of course, the CCG Hour is not only for CCG members, but I'm always glad when one of us could make it to chat along with me. So, Reverend James, I've spoken enough.
All right.
Welcome.
I'm not an agronomist. Okay.
Okay, and so we're setting that clear.
I'm not an
for the record.
agriculturist.
So we're setting that over. That's a disclaimer.
Yeah, but I did in my research look up some research about the proper time for planting of wheat.
Wheat?
Yes, because wheat, corn, they're all the same family.
Right.
All right. And wheat, the sheaf of the wheat, has been symbolic and significant in what I'm talking about.
Right.
And interestingly, that the ideal time to plant wheat is around the end of October, November, and you should finish planting your corn by November, your wheat by November.
Really?
So November, see? The Peruvians have seen they used to call them month of November, the month of the angel of death. So November was a month where in various societies and cultures, people remembered the dead. Not just Christians. This is a pre-Christian observance. In many cultures, November has been used to remember the dead.
Is there a particular reason?
But as I said, November has been...
That's just it.
Yeah, I don't know if there are a particular reason for the month
itself.
November.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It could be that November, and this is just my thought, we're coming to the end of, we're in autumn for those people in temperate climates.
Yeah.
When the earth begins to get covered. When I was a student at university, it's around November and so that we'd actually do some planting. Big trees, you remove trees and you replant them in the soil. So I don't know if that, because a lot has to do with new life. You put stuff in the earth around at that time.
Right.
And when spring
When
comes.
spring comes. Ah.
Yes. So that could have some significance.
Right.
I have not looked that up. But yeah, I am talking today about not corn specifically, but asham. And asham is made from corn. The word asham comes from a Akan language. Akan is journey from Ghana. They have Twi, Akan, and other languages. There's a word called Osiam, Osiam, which the dictionary, the English Akan dictionary says is ground corn.
Oh.
Yes. Interested?
Yes.
Yes. So when the slaves came, my apologies, people. I should never have said slaves. And it's important that I correct it. When our enslaved ancestors came, enslaved, not slave. When our enslaved ancestor came, they made confectionery. So they had, they would eat what was left over. That's why we are eating pigtails and eating all of those kinds of stuff. That's the kinds of stuff they ate. We ate the entrails. We found creative ways to make food, because after you give the master and so the choicest part,
the rest
exactly. So they were creative in terms of what they had for sweets, their own desserts, and they brought this tradition over from West Africa.
Okay.
The asham, the ground corn. So you put sugar in it. Some people may put a little salt, and you have a confectionery, something you can eat. So this thing about asham, it's something in the Caribbean. They have different names. Like I think in Jamaica they may call it brown George. Trinidad they may call it chili billy or something like that. They have different names for it. But in Grenada we call it asham. So why my interest in asham? I have a particular interest in death and dying. And I was doing some research around All Saints, All Souls. And I wondered if there was some significance to people eating asham on All Saints Day, All Souls Day. And in my research, I discovered there was no relationship at all. It's just that in the past, we used to have the harvest of our corn just before November. And so there was an abundance of corn. And so people would parch the corn and then ground it, put sugar in it, and come to the cemetery with it. I used to think it symbolized.
But I thought you had to. It's because in my head growing up, it's like without asham, you don't have this activity. The one just had to have. You had to have, because then you don't see corn throughout the year, at least now.
Right.
But you certainly don't see asham
Throughout
the year.
Exactly. That's the thing. So I thought maybe asham represented ashes. When somebody dies, ashes to ashes, to dust to dust.
Yes.
So I thought so. But when I spoke to people, there's no real connection. And then the research I was doing helped me to make a connection.
Right. Okay.
Because corn, and in our region maize, it's a staple.
Yeah.
Supports life.
Yes.
In all civilizations, it was used. Some use wheat rather than corn. And Jesus said, unless a
Grain
grain
of
of wheat dies,
falls into the ground and dies, it
Yes.
abides alone.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. Now that you're saying it, a lot of scriptures are coming, because there is also a scripture concerning corn where it's actually a blessing.
Yes.
It was one of the patriarchs releasing a blessing and saying that let the corn and the wine and the dew of heaven rest upon. I can't remember which of the sons that he was declaring this blessing over. But interesting.
That reference that you're making there, the word for corn, dagon, the Hebrew word, does not mean maize as in corn, but the range of cereal-based products.
Right, so all of the
barley, wheat,
right,
so forth.
but it's still all of the staples, all the things that will
Exactly,
sustain
yes.
life.
The barley, the wheat, and so forth.
Interesting.
And then Paul himself used corn and wheat as a symbol of resurrection. Right? And so in many cultures, if you go into the cemetery, you will see a sheaf of wheat on the tombstone. That is
that is what that
symbolic
is.
of resurrection and new life. So corn itself was symbolic of new life and resurrection. It was symbolic of plenty of blessings, but also of new life. So here I am now making the connections.
And
And
making
then
them too.
in the Greek Orthodox Church, people usually make a corn-based meal that they take to the church when they have memorial services. It's called koliva, and it's usually made with corn, sometimes in the shape of a tomb or in the shape of a gravestone, or sometimes when they make it, it has pomegranates and so forth in it, and they may make it a cross on it.
Right.
But the corn, boiled corn and whatever it is that they use to make that cake is done on the day of remembrance, or they do the day before the day
Right.
of remembrance to take into the church on the day of remembrance.
So corn in itself, well, of course, corn, wheat, well, the family
Yeah.
is really, so it's used in rituals. Well,
Yes,
it's ritualistic.
yes, it's used. Yes. So even if we were not using the asham ritualistically, the corn, the wheat, had ritual significance.
Wow.
And then something happened. And that's why I got on this trip. not drugs, but I got on this trip. When I do my research, I found there is a Hebrew word, A-S-H-A-M. Asham. I said, let me see where this is taking me. And asham is a Hebrew word for a guilt offering.
Interesting, though.
A guilt offering. But, so it is different from the regular sin offering. The guilt offering is where you offer an offering if you sin unintentionally.
That's why I said interesting, though.
Yes, you know. So because once you recognize that you sin, then it becomes a sin offering.
Yes.
So you offer this guilt offering. I said, okay. What if we were to actually now associate the asham that we use
at that time of
at
the
that
year?
time
Hey.
as an opportunity to offer confession
Interesting.
for sins that we've committed of which we are unaware.
Well, certainly not how asham being used these days.
No.
Clearly not.
No.
But if we continue to talk of it from the possibilities of that whole, with that connection there with, my goodness, that is really interesting.
So that's why I refer to corn
as a
ritual object.
Yeah,
Yes. Because it has this significance. And if you think about it, in many cultures, when they have the observation of in the wake of someone's death, they would use bread. What's
Wheat.
wheat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, why not use something else?
Yeah.
I mean, it's usually,
So
yeah.
it's a staple.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was significant. And so I wanted to say something a bit about the All Saints.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I when I was doing my doctoral project, my paper was on the rituals in our society that helps us to mitigate the pain of grief.
Right.
All right? So I look at the various rituals that we have in our society.
Mm-hmm.
One of the rituals that we look at was the death announcement, the obituary. Some people may not see that as a ritual.
I was just about to say, why do you consider it a ritual? Mm-hmm.
In the past, before we had radio and television, people used to go around on donkeys or on foot and make announcements that someone has died.
Oh, okay.
That is so that the community can now rally to the support of the people.
Okay.
Now, there are some people who, a ritual is something that you do habitually over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Some people would not miss the death announcement.
No, at
right?
all. Yeah.
So it's a ritual, and it makes you aware that someone in the society has died.
Mm-hmm.
It is especially useful, particularly when you have people who are living abroad and died abroad that
Right.
you don't know would have died. Okay. So that ritual was very much important. So that's the first ritual I looked at. The second ritual that we looked at had to do with the wake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely a ritual.
The wake originated in Ireland, I believe. In those days, you didn't have, right now, if somebody were to die, a doctor has to come and pronounce the person dead.
Mm-hmm.
In those days, you didn't have that.
Right.
And a person might not really be dead.
Mm-hmm.
They may just be unconscious.
Yes.
And so people were chosen to sit with the dead for a while to make sure they're actually dead. So it was called the watch.
Oh,
And
so
the
you
wake,
keep awake
you keep awake
to watch the
to
dead.
watch the dead.
Uh-huh.
Or the person.
Well, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Right. Yeah, the person, because you're not so sure if the dead
that's
yet.
how it.
Right.
That was the origin of the wake. All right, and then coming out of that, you also had the.
So wait, let me just cut you for a while. So drinking coffee, for example,
Right.
at the wake would have obviously have been to
help you
keep the person stay awake.
And sometimes other friends may join with the
Yes.
person, and then
to
you
keep them awake.
yes, and then you drink a little other drink, you know.
Add another drink to the coffee.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So we look at that ritual too, and therein I have discovered that what might have been more a Catholic tradition has become a cultural part. Like you have the third night, where in Grenada we have the third night. In some countries they do on 9 nights, and the church is involved in prayer for the repose of the soul of the dead on the 40th day of so forth. And it's believed, and I'm not speaking as a Catholic.
Yeah.
All right,
yeah.
just some of the things I gleaned in my research, that when a person dies, the soul of the person who has died, because it had become so used to its body, tends to hover around the body for a while. And then the soul of the righteous dead may actually travel for a bit and visit the places where it did acts of righteousness. And then the soul comes back on the third day in the same way that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day. So the soul comes back, and then the Lord requires the soul to come and make oblation to God, to worship the God on the third day.
Oh.
That's why you have the third night. And so the
Ah.
church is involved in prayer on the third night for that soul.
But do you think for one moment, I mean, you've been here longer than I have been, that people who presently follow the third night and so forth tradition, that they understand that is what
Well, I
they're
don't know
supposed
if
to be
that
doing, you
is
think?
their understanding. This is just what I got from my
Okay, got
from my
you.
research. A very old. This is from a very old document.
Right.
All right. Then the ninth, after the soul would have made oblation to the divine, the soul is taken to all of the places of bliss. All right. So, in other words, the soul gets a tour of the heavenly abodes,
Okay.
and it's for 6 days. And on the ninth day,
Oh, so that's after the third night.
yes,
Ah.
and so on so for 6 days. So on the
Yes.
ninth day or ninth night, the soul returns again and makes oblation.
Right.
And so, if the soul was a righteous soul, the soul rejoices that this would be its heavenly abode. If the soul was the soul of a wicked person, it has all kinds of regrets and all so forth.
Okay.
Between the 9th and the 40th, then the soul is taken on a tour
Again.
of all the hellish places,
Oh.
places of torment. You see, survey all of hell. Then on the 40th night, the soul is brought back before God, and that's when the soul is judged.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that is what
So
you
that's the
that's what
third-
you got from your
Yes,
research.
the 3rd, the 9th, and the 40th.
40th. Oh.
So that's the significance. That's why people insist on doing the 3rd.
Right.
But remember, there are a lot of people who don't know the significance, but they still insist on it.
I'm
being
doing it. Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
3rd.
Yeah.
So the other ritual that we looked at is the funeral. And you know, in some cultures, Jewish culture, for instance, the time before the funeral is focused on the dead, because in the Jews, you're buried almost right away.
Right. Okay.
So the focus is on the dead, but the focus after the burial is on the family.
okay.
All right.
Mm.
And so when we look at the funeral, the funeral plays an important part. Because what I did in my research is tied all of these rituals to a task of mourning.
Mm-hmm.
And I used William Wooden's tasks. He has 4 tasks. One is to accept the reality of the death. That's the very first task.
Mm-hmm.
The second task is to experience the pain of the loss, which is important. The third task is adjusting to an environment in which the person no longer is.
Mm-hmm.
And the fourth task is emotionally relocating the lost person, or as now a lot of people who deal with grief call it, continuing bonds, in that the relationship doesn't end, but it is changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, you have the All Saints. That's how I look at the All Saints.
Mm.
So when you go to the cemetery,
Mm-hmm.
what is supposed to happen
Right.
is that the community comes out to remember those who have died.
Right.
And so there is an African saying that a person does not die until there comes a generation that does not remember him or her.
Mm. Okay.
All right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you go to the cemetery, and I always use my grandfather as an example, and I sit by the grave, and someone comes and asks me, "Who do you have here?"
Right.
And I say, Peter James.
Right.
And someone might say,
Oh, I knew him.
I
Yeah.
knew him.
Mhm.
He was the man that used to pick up the offering You know, or he's the one that used to maintain the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
So there is the remembrance.
Right.
In medieval times, remembering the dead, burying the dead, was so important that people were concerned about those who would have died in wars, those who had died at sea, because
Right.
it was important that their bodies be buried. So, for instance, in ancient Rome, if people died in battle,
Mm-hmm.
they would burn the dead, the bodies, then take the bones back to Rome to have them
To have them
buried.
buried. Right.
Because it's important that you have some kind of marker so that prayers can be said for these people and so forth. And in another culture, if the person died at sea or you don't know where they died, a cross is made. The cross is placed on the bed. And then people will come to the home, and the cross symbolizes the person who's
person.
not there.
Right.
Then they'll have a procession with a cross. Then on the day of the funeral, the cross is taken to the church. After that, the cross is buried. And sometimes they would just, instead of burying the one cross, they'll wait until they have a number of crosses,
Right.
and then bury them all together. Because it was so important to remember and to ensure that the souls of these persons, that they can be prayed for. Yes. So for me, the going to the cemetery on All Saints, and I needed to make this correction, that often when we go to the cemetery on All Saints, we are actually observing All Souls.
Based on the date.
Because All Saints is the November 1st. All Souls is November 2nd. All Saints is for all saints, remembrance of all saints, known and unknown to the church.
Right.
All Souls was for all the souls that are maybe in purgatory.
Okay, and of course, when you say the church here, we're talking the Catholic,
The Catholic Church.
Right.
Yes. And again, I'm saying I'm not a Catholic expert.
Yeah, I know, but
This
just
is
based on the
from-
research.
from
Yeah, and I
other
mean, it's
research
right
I've
there.
done.
It's right
Yeah.
there to, to find. The information is right there to find.
So I often say to people too that, because right now you have a lot of cremation being done. When traditionally people would prefer to be buried because you have to be buried with your head facing a particular direction and all of those kinds of things. So that for when resurrection comes around,
No, I don't.
you
but,
didn't know that.
No, I did not.
So burial in a consecrated cemetery was important. But now we have a lot of cremation being
Yes.
done, and people like the thought of just going to the sea
And sprinkling and all of
and
that.
so forth. So I would say to people, even if you sprinkle the ashes, please make a stone.
Right.
So that
memorial.
as a memorial, so that person can be remembered. For me, it is important to remember. Otherwise, a person would easily cease to exist. I'm talking about their memory and their contributions. So going to the cemetery, one of the most beautiful sights I've seen on All Saints Day was in the cemetery above PBC, right next to PBC. I saw 3 different generations of people. And the older folks were telling the younger folks
right.
about their father who had died and they had not known the father.
So that is where that should be the real symbol of the of
That's
all.
significant,
That is what
yeah.
it is.
There was also, in olden times, there was a belief that on that day, the souls of the departed would come back and visit with their relatives, and so that's why you have food and so forth, And so they had a certain amount of time by which they're supposed to be to partake of the food. But so in those days, you had bonfires that were lit so that the souls of
Who
the
could
can
see.
find their way home.
Oh.
So the candles also were in a way of letting the souls know. Some people see candles for a different reason.
Right.
Some candles are, for me, when I light a candle, it's symbolic of the life of the person that has died.
Right.
Yeah, some people light candles to keep evil spirits away because they believe souls might come around and the light may keep them away. But you know, long ago, people would have bonfires so the souls can come home. So in terms of the All Saints, All Souls visitation to the cemetery, it is very important. I went to Carriacou last week, and I met a woman that I did not know. I was sheltering ring next to her, the tomb that she was. And I said to her, "Can you tell me something about the person who died here?"
Yes.
And I got a whole story about that man. A man I had never known, but a man I got to know.
Right. You met him now.
I met him. And I think that is the significance.
Right.
And so that is why I'm so disappointed when you have all of this DJs and all of this loud music that you can barely sit down and talk and hear yourself in the cemetery.
Yeah, because what you're describing there, if it is that one individual who may not be Catholic or have anything to do with any particular, it's not about religion, but if that person goes there because his or her loved one has passed and they want to remember or tell, as you said, tell somebody else who then, but then, so the whole music thing, and because I don't go, to be honest, it's not been a practice that I don't do it. But especially as you're explaining it that way, and I can definitely see the significance of it. So then, but how the DJ and how that reach in it?
Well,
no.
everything has degenerated
true.
into that.
Yeah.
Everything, you know. But when I look at it, my grandfather was a custodian of the Grandins cemetery when I was growing up. But before he was a custodian, he was. But I think around the when we had All Saints, in preparation for All Saints and All Souls, he was not expected to be the one to clean the whole place. The whole community will come out to clean it. And I can still taste the juice with essence in it. And the bread with sulfur sauce. Because the whole community will come out, clean the cemetery, and then eat together afterwards. And I would love for the All Souls, All Saints celebration to be a community event where the community comes together and we can all talk about the persons who have died and who in small ways, in big ways, would have made a contribution to the society.
Wow. Okay, Reverend James, it's amazing. If we were to check the time, we'll be surprised.
Yeah.
Actually, we only have a few more minutes. And we did not take a break, but should we take a break? But I don't think we have much time in any event. So I'll just say, so seeing that most of our time is gone, let us still take a quick break, because when we return, we will just, I really do want to ask you about this. It seems to me like you're inspired by death. And I do believe it is important to talk about. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to just wrap up. But I want to ask you just a few questions concerning that.
Sure.
All right, right.
You are my strength, strength like no other, strength like no other, reaches to me.
Going through a storm, but I won't go down.
You've never been closer than you are right now.
Let's sing it loud, y'all.
You are my strength, strength like no other, strength like no other, reaches to me.
Well, thank you very much for staying with us. This morning I am chatting with Reverend James, member of the CCG, no stranger to those of you who have been viewing this program. But if you just join in, then you're wondering, what are they talking about? We have been speaking about Asham, corn, well, it was supposed to be corn alone, but we reached in Asham. we just before the break, we actually were talking about All Saints and All Souls, the symmetry part of it and the real significance of it. But Reverend James, you mentioned something in passing. I did not stop you then, but I am intrigued at it. Death, dying, and you mentioned 4 tasks.
Yes.
I do believe that death is inevitable. We all know that.
Right.
Yet, the way in which death, or mourning rather, is how it is handled or not handled, or my goodness, I believe that it is something that is an issue. And a lot of people continue to be hurt. As a matter of fact, on my way here this morning, I met a lady. I hadn't seen her in quite a while, and she stopped. She's like, long time I haven't seen you. What you doing here? You know, people are always asking you, what are you doing in a place where you're supposed to be? But she immediately said to me, oh, do you know my husband died? I said, here. I said, oh, I'm so sorry, no, I didn't know. And then, of course, she immediately went into how he died, how they could not find her. So I got in about 10 minutes a lot of info. Right. And then she ends by saying, so pray for me, eh? And then she, inside of the conversation, she also said, I miss him a lot because you remember, of course, you remember I used to always be with him, which is the truth. Whenever you see one, you saw the other. Yeah. And she, in her speaking to, you could see she's actually trying to console herself. Right. And then a little tear began, and I'm just there, of course, listening, obviously. But as you mentioned that 4 tasks, as I said, I don't believe that a lot of people, well, even if you don't know it as 4 tasks, but I don't believe that people go through those steps properly or even finish it. Sometimes people in step 1 and people telling them, oh, you need to, so if we can just talk a little bit about that in a little more detail.
There are different grief experts speak about different tasks. Yes. But I use William Worden's tasks because some of the other schemas are more static, but this is called the task of grief work. So it's something that you're actively engaged in. So for instance, you cannot grieve someone unless you accept that they have died. Correct. So that's why the first task is accepting the reality of the death. So if somebody dies, regardless of how gruesome the body might be, it's important for people to be able to recognize. So even if it's a hand with a ring or so, you need to be able to see it. So if people want to see the body, let them see it, because often people who have not seen the body regret it because they have difficulty really believing that it's the person that has died. Wow. And then, of course, the pain. And so when we talk about the wake, traditionally, that's when people go to the home and sit with the people, the family and so forth. And they, in that still with the reality of the dead, in the conversations, they speak about the deceased in the past tense. Yes. Yeah. So that brings home to you the reality that the person is gone. The funeral does the same thing. And there is a practice nowadays where they put bush on top of the casket. I would wish they would not do that, but reason for that, when the soil hits the casket,
Yeah, it does something.
it does something to you, because a lot of people are still dealing with the fact that maybe I'm dreaming. When you hear that, yeah,
You know it's final.
it's final. It's final. And so the task that a lot of people are stuck with is the task that deals with the getting on with life, not that the person has died.
So that would be the third or the fourth task.
That's the third task.
third.
Okay. Readjusting or adjusting to an environment in which the person no longer is.
Yeah.
That woman you spoke about, her husband would not have just been her husband.
Not at all.
He would have been her lover,
But
her
she
best friend.
actually said that. Those were the
Yes.
3 words she said.
Plus, if he were the main breadwinner, a lot of times after someone dies, a family becomes, especially the man, the family becomes poorer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if a woman were, I did a presentation yesterday at a function, and I said sometimes a man may say to his wife, "You don't need to work, you can stay home, I'll take care of you." But he needs to make sure he has all the resources
Exactly.
to take care of her
After he has passed.
died.
Yes. Yeah.
Because then what happens? And so we talking about to your spouse about debts you might have, the financial commitments that you have. Speak to your spouse about what might happen if one of you were to die.
Yes.
So all of those kinds of discussions. Do you have a will yet? Sometimes you have these men who are married, but they may have children all over the place.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a will, every single person has
entitlement to it by law.
And then the one with the cemetery that we're talking about, the continuing bonds, is that your relationship with the person who has died does not end. It changes.
Right.
A lot of times people go to the cemetery.
Yes, outside of all sins and all of that. Yeah, they just sit and talk. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes they go and they update the person on what is going on in their lives and so forth. It is not for the person who has died, but it's therapeutic for the person who's doing it. Yes.
Because that last one you said, you do have people who would say things like, well, the person dead already, so what it is that you're going and waste your time there for? You would hear those kinds of comments, you would see those types of attitudes, and sometimes even family members who don't feel the way that this particular individual, maybe they were much closer to the person who died, would say those kinds of things, and then that in itself begins another sore area again.
And some people think that there's a timeline by which time you need to get over. You never really get over the loss.
I was just
of
going to
someone.
ask that if there is any cope, it's not
cope,
really over.
but you don't get over. Years later on, okay, let's say how old is your youngest daughter?
She is 15.
Let's say your daughter dies, God forbid. And years later on, as you see other people her age at the time of her death, you say, if she had not died,
say she would have
been this.
Yeah.
And you think about all the dreams that you had for her, which died with her. So it's your dreams.
Yes.
So you had to grieve those dreams also, not just her.
I would like us to speak at some point in more detail, on really that. And I think I mentioned that because every time you come, somehow we end up going a little bit, but we've never really, looked at, especially the mourning, because I really believe that we're going to say for Grenada, in Grenada, I mean, come on, people are dying, but I don't know that people are being counseled or even see maybe the need for it, and then you go around and you hear it in funerals a lot. I'm not talking about the minister or the priest or whoever, but especially with the persons around. Do relax yourself, don't cry, you hear that sentiment throughout. I've heard it growing up, and people almost feel as though they're doing something wrong to grieve.
Yeah.
And I really believe that it is important for us, you know, to take our time and really just go through, because I believe it will help many
Right.
people maybe who are going to be listening and viewing the program, who more than likely may be still experiencing, you know, the
So
loss.
mourning
Yeah.
is different from grieving, because mourning has to do more with the cultural expression
Right.
of the grief and the rituals that you have within your society. Some people wear the clothing, all of that is part of, you know, mourning may end at a specific time,
Right.
but the
But the
grieving
grief
does not.
That's it.
And when you go to the cemetery, many times the majority of the people who are in the cemetery would have already forgotten about the person. When I say in any significant way, because when you go to the cemetery, it's usually those people who are closest to the grave. When the buried is, that are focusing on that.
Yeah.
If you go and take a sample of the conversations that are happening all around the cemetery, it's no longer about the you know.
Yeah.
So yes, I always like to tell people that there is not a time limit, but you learn to cope. If you can't function afterwards, then you may have complicated grief and you may need therapy.
Right.
But grief is not an illness.
Right.
And one of the best ways of getting through it is talking about it. So one of the first things I would do when I go to see someone, I'll ask them to tell me about the person.
About the person, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, Reverend James, as I said, we have finished this program faster than I thought we would. Thanks very much for coming, stopping by. I'm sure that we are going to get to talk again sooner rather than later, hopefully. I hope that because I have a feeling that will be into the new year by the time we do get to talk again. But I would really want us to look there and also revisit a little bit about the suicide thing. Yeah,
Sure,
I know. Yeah,
sure.
I really believe inside of it that we would want to make sure
All
that
right,
we
we
look
can talk
at
about
that part.
suicide,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So thanks again for coming.
You're welcome.
Closing words, if you have any for us.
Death is not morbid. Talking about death is not morbid. It's a reality, and my role is to try to help people to cope with the inevitable. I've always said to people, when you look at life, you must realize that you are terminal. I am terminal. We are all terminal. From the moment we are born, we are terminal. So how do we live in the interim between birth and death is what matters.
Yeah, and we will talk that. All right, thank you again for coming. Viewers, listeners, thank you very much for staying with us for the entire program. I trust that you are going to continue to keep yourself safe, be strong, hold on to the Lord, and just don't give up. And please, as I usually say as well, do not take permanent solutions to temporary issues. All right? May God bless you and keep you, and may His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Until we chat again next week, Friday, God's will, have yourself a great rest of your weekend and a great rest of your week. All right, bye-bye.
You are my strength.